All right, greetings, everyone. Welcome to the weekly Fireside Chat podcast. Happy to be here with you. What's the date today? May 22nd, 2022. Lots of twos going on today. So we're still here in Rochester. Tracy is still here. She's still got, I think she's still got the COVID. Maybe not, but she's got something. We both got tested again this morning. We're going to get our results probably tomorrow. I'll let you know. There's a good chance that I don't have it, but there's a chance that I still do. Who knows? I feel good. I have a very occasional congestion. It's not anything that's been bothering me. There's no discomfort. There's nothing like that at all. My energy level is very good. It's normal. Tracy is still dealing with some effects. Overall, she's good. We're still eating good food and all of that, but she's just tired. She's it's just knocking her out. So the cat and I, my cat named Yates, who is over in the corner there, we are doing everything we can to take good care of her, and it's working. I think she's in good spirits. So what was interesting this week? Just the other day, I did a small piece here for this site for you guys on the little tiny island in the Aleutians called Adak Island. And I found a couple of UFO reports, USO reports from that. By the way, it looks like I missed one from Wendell Stevens from the late 1940s. Many of you remember who Wendell Stevens was. He was a U.S. Air Force pilot, was stationed out that way, I think in the Aleutians. I caught a sighting of his from the late 1940s, perhaps 1949, where apparently he also saw objects, I think, coming out of the water of that general region. I don't know if it was by Adak Island, but it was out by the Aleutians, that's where that is. So yet one more piece that I overlooked, caught it later. Sorry about that. But it was interesting for me to do that. And if you haven't caught it, I think it's interesting. It's probably worth your time. It's just a half hour long. There were a number of very interesting UFO sightings from that incredibly remote, little tiny island out in the northern Pacific. It got me thinking, many things that has got me thinking about. So one, which I keep coming back to over and over again, is the just incredible density of UFO sightings. It's very easy for us to overlook this. And that includes even today when, yes, we're allowed to talk about UFOs to some extent in the general public. Congress had their UAP hearings. Okay, fine. But what you really still don't get a sense of is just how unbelievably dense and like nonstop flood of sightings is going on every single day in this world. It really does not, even now, get the kind of attention that I feel it demands, not just deserves. It really demands. This is one reason I have been such a big fan for years of the National UFO Reporting Center run by Peter Davenport. If you've been on this site long enough, you've heard me talking about how important that site is. And for that reason, it's why I've really gone into the old back issues of Filer's Files, run by George Filer, retired Air Force major, as just a really invaluable resource of UFO history, but also UFO sightings over the years. George Filer has collected them. And I will say, he will sometimes have stories on items in there that I do not have a lot of credence in. George has got his own particular areas that he is absolutely focused on. And for me, I don't really care about all of the things that he's into. But what makes him so valuable, invaluable, is just the fact that he takes these reports in. He gets basic UFO news. He puts that on his site, and it's there every week. You just go through it, and you get a really good sense of UFO history through his website. It's an incredible service. I adore George. I love the work he's done. I have tremendous respect for him. But anyway, my point is, when you go through this, you see just an incredible density of UFO sightings that go on around the world every single day. Every day, there's something important happening in terms of sightings and the activity of these other beings. I used to call them these others, the aliens, the visitors. What do we call them? They're aliens. They're here. They are operating. And not only that, but in going through those sightings over at Adak Island, once again, it reminds me again of how frequently and how important water-based UFO sightings have been throughout our history. For that reason, I pulled this book off the shelf, talked about this many times. To me, this is such a great classic. And one of the members of our site wrote to me just this week about this book. This is Invisible Residence by the very late great Ivan T. Sanderson. This book is from 1970. This is an old book. I don't believe it exists as an electronic book. You can only get this as, I think, an out-of-print book. You can find it on Amazon or some other retailer might have it. Ivan Sanderson was, my opinion, one of the most elegant writers who ever wrote about UFOs. So that's one reason just to read him. The guy was just a damn good writer. Like really, when you find someone who understands the craft of writing, right, it makes a difference. There's a difference between competent journalistic writing and then someone who just knows what the hell he's doing. That was Ivan Sanderson. On top of that, Sanderson was an interesting man. He was former British intelligence back during the Second World War. He was intelligent. He was a smart guy, and was into the weird his whole life. And one of his interests was cryptids, so cryptozoology. And he had written back in the early 1960s some of the earliest really great books on Yeti, Bigfoot, that type of thing. He wrote several of those. I have not read those books. That'll be a nice treat for me one day. And in fact, I think I would like to read Ivan Sanderson's books on cryptids. I have a feeling I would love them. I have a kind of an interesting side interest in cryptids. I'm not an expert, but I interviewed a few Bigfoot witnesses over the years. I did a TV show 15 plus years ago where we did an episode on Bigfoot and I got to interview some witnesses. And I'll just tell you, they're just like UFO witnesses. There's really no difference. You talk to these people and, they saw what they saw. So that's interesting. I met Lauren Coleman. I know Lauren a bit. He's probably the leading cryptid researcher in the world. Lauren lives in Portland, Maine. He has a cryptozoological museum there I've been to. It's really cool. It's a serious study. But anyways, Ivan Sanderson got into cryptids, and then he wrote two really superb UFO books in the 1960s and early 70s. He wrote the first of them was from, I think, 1967. It's called Uninvited Visitors or Uninvited Guests. I think Uninvited Visitors. That's a really fine book. It's kind of a philosophical, part of it's a philosophical kind of epistemological exploration of UFOs. But as I remember, he does talk about some interesting sightings, but it's just Ivan Sanderson applying powers of reason to UFOs, and he's just so good. But then his greatest book is this one, Invisible Residence. And this was really the first major work that I am aware of that exclusively dealt with underwater UFO sightings, USOs. And it's a great book, and I'm going to read the very first paragraph to you right now. Tracy and I covered this in one of our episodes of Intelligent Disclosure several years ago on video. We did a whole thing on water-based UFO sightings, and she reminded me just today that I read this first paragraph, come on now, on that show as well. But I want to read it here for you as well, because people forget things. It's chapter 1, titled The Mystery, and I'm just going to read the first paragraph, so just bear with me. This is so well done. One evening in the Antarctic, a Brazilian scientist by the name of Dr. Rubens J. Vilela, seconded to the U.S. Navy's Operation Deep Freeze, and aboard an icebreaker was literally jolted almost out of both his body and his mind by a, quote, something that suddenly came roaring up out of the sea through no less than 37 feet of ice and went on up into the sky like a vast silvery bullet. That's the first sentence. Pretty good, right? The ship was in Admiralty Bay, which faces the South Atlantic Ocean. The only other witnesses were the officer on watch and the helmsman, as it was an extremely cold day and all other personnel were below decks. Further, these witnesses saw only the tag end of the performance because they were busy with charts. But what they did witness was quite enough. Enormous blocks of ice had been hurled high into the air and came cascading down all around the hole, burst through the thick ice sheet, and the water was rolling and apparently boiling, while masses of steam issued from both the hole and the descending ice. From Dr. Vilela's description, the spectators were apparently, quote, not amused, nor are we. That's the first paragraph. That's all he's got on that case. It's really just amazingly well written and quite vivid. I don't have a date for that. I'm guessing it was in the 1960s. I mean, this book was published in 1970. Sanderson does not give details on this that you really would just be dying to have. I mean, I have actually never bothered to investigate this particular event to see if there's a date to it. Maybe if one of you can find it, that would be awesome. But I just like it because it's vivid. It's Sanderson. I put high credibility in Ivan Sanderson's research. And it's just, like, so if we assume this is the mid 1960s or earlier, there's a lot of these types of stories. I published a book a couple of years ago. I don't really publish other people's books anymore, but I did one by mainly by Paul Stonehill, who's a Ukrainian researcher, really specializes in a lot of Russian UFO books, reports, and he wrote one on Russian USOs. And in that particular book, and I've got that sitting around here, he has a lot of stories of Russian Navy and Russian commercial vessels out in the major oceans, and also one of the big lakes in Russia, the deepest lake in the world, is called Lake Baikal. That's in Siberia. He's got a lot of stories out of that. A lot of these cases that he has also of objects coming out of the water, going into the water. We've heard these USO stories sporadically over the years. There's not as many of those as there are good UFO stories and accounts over land, but they do exist. There's quite a few. And of course, when you get into, you talk to Navy people, you get into the rumor mill. I have a lot of credibility in that so-called rumor mill. I have personally spoken with active duty and retired Navy personnel, and it's quite obvious that they have encountered very, very fast-moving underwater objects that move at speeds that we are not supposed to be able to attain whatsoever, and not submarines and not whales. Like, no one goes as fast as some of these objects have apparently been recorded. We're talking hundreds of knots per hour. It's just ridiculously fast under a medium as dense as water. And yet there are craft that have been tracked apparently doing that. You can't get confirmation. You're not going to get FOIA on this, but those stories are absolutely out there. And it really makes me think, okay, so we've got, there's an infrastructure. Somebody's infrastructure is operating under the water. We all know that, more than 70% of the Earth's surface is covered with water. It's mostly ocean and deep lakes. It's rough, generally speaking, it's inaccessible to 99.99 plus percent of the people on this planet. We're just not over the oceans. We can't live there. And so you've got, a lot of empty empty, empty, empty space out there. And for the longest time, it was empty, and it was also pretty much unmonitored in any way. Before we had satellites, and then satellites that could actually really kind of get into the oceans and under the oceans. That's only in the last few decades where we've really had that kind of a capability. And so it was, you got to wonder, like, who's out there? What does it take to work underwater? First of all, what do you require? Another book that I actually published a few years ago, one of the first ones that I published that was not my own, was by Richard Sauder. Richard's been living in South America for the longest time now, but he, some of you might be familiar with his work. He wrote a couple of books on underground bases and construction techniques that we humans have been developing over the years. And a book that I published of his called Hidden in Plain Sight, it's actually my favorite of his books. He talks a lot about going under the ground and also about going under the ocean floor. And one thing he points out is that as far ago as the 1960s, that the United States Navy apparently was taking proposals. There was an artist that Sauder got to know who was contracted by the Navy to do artistic illustrations of undersea bases of various types for the Navy. He never found out that those went anywhere whatsoever. They may not have gone anywhere, but this is a real man, a real artist. He had a real Navy contract in the 1960s. And some of his illustrations, like he's got almost like Jetsons under the water, like glass domes underwater. But the real work that he did for them was showing how, having bases under the ocean floor. And one thing that Sauder, of course, did in his work is he studied tunneling technologies going back to the 1960s and even prior. And I think he made a very good case, frankly, that the technology was there, certainly by the 1960s, not simply to go deep underground with very advanced tunneling technology, but also under the ocean floors. And a lot of that's going to depend on your geology, and you don't want to like create an undersea ocean base where you've got a fault line and things like that. You've got to be smart about where you do this, but it is absolutely possible. And look, we know in our own world, we've got tunnels that go under the ocean floor. If you drive through New York City, you go under the Lincoln Tunnel and the Holland Tunnel. Those are both under the Hudson. One of them's under the Hudson River. One of them's under the, are they both under the Hudson? I think so. Anyway, they're both under the, you've got water, and then you've got ground, you've got granite or some kind of rock, and that's what they tunnel underneath the water, and it's totally safe. We've got the Channel Tunnel connecting Great Britain to France. That's more than 25 miles long, I believe. You've got Japan. There's a series of tunnels that are actually even longer combined than the Channel Tunnel. That's under the ocean floor as well. So we've got the technology. We know how to go under the ocean floor ourselves. We can do it. And if you're going to have if you were to have a permanent base under the ocean floor, what would you need? Well, you need a secure geological location. Okay, so you do that. You need oxygen, and you need energy. Well, how do you get the oxygen? Well, we already know how to do that. We split oxygen out of the water. That's what nuclear submarines do. They don't have a whole bunch of oxygen tanks in there. They're taking oxygen out of the water, H2O, and they know how to process that. We've been able to do that since I think the 1950s. So we know how to do that. And then in terms of energy, well, that's easy as pie. I mean, you can find a geothermal source. Maybe you can work with that. You can have a portable nuclear source of energy that would last you pretty much forever. That's not a problem either. So you've got the oxygen, you've got the energy, you've got a secure base under the ocean floor. It sounds insane, but it actually is totally possible. We can do that. One question to ask is, are we doing that? Why would we do that? You can have a lot of remote places without having to go into the ocean floor, but there certainly could be advantages to having at least one or a few bases under the ocean floor that's totally secure and no one can get to. Yeah, I could imagine it's possible. If you're an alien group, that could really be super valuable and super useful, particularly if you come here at a time when you're seeing these human beings in their development phase. Let's say they arrive here in the middle of the 19th century. I think, I talked about this in the Alien Agendas, my last book, that we've probably been monitored for a very, very long time, probably at some level throughout most of our history. Probably true. But that doesn't mean that we were under active manipulation or active surveillance all that time. I mean, the reality is it would be hard to make the case that we were all that exciting for, those thousands of years, going through starting our first cities in ancient Sumer and developing writing. I mean, sure, it's interesting, it's noteworthy, but like what really is an alien group going to be doing with us while we're going through that stage of development? I don't really think a whole lot. I mean, the Roman Empire, sure, that was interesting too, but even so, it's not like they can really do a whole lot with us. But once we start developing our own science and industry, around during the late 18th, early 19th century, I think that we're probably going to be getting some more people now thinking, all right, now is the time to be watching these humans. Where are we going to do it? Where will we establish our base of operations? Well, maybe in a mountain that's kind of remote. Sure. And there's very possible likelihood that that is the case. Pyrenees, sure. We probably, many of us have heard about Mount Hayes, Alaska. Yes, I think probably yes. And there's other places as well. But under the ocean, pardon me, inside the ocean or under the ocean floor, I think yes. There's a case from Charles Fort, when he was going through the New York Public Library a century ago, looking at all these old, anomalous stories that just didn't fit into our world. And Fort found essentially a USO report from 1845 in the Mediterranean Sea, off the coast of Malta or Corsica. I think somewhere in the, I think Corsica. And it's 1845. This is a known case. There's a date to it. I can't remember the date offhand. Captain of a vessel. It's late at night. He's with a couple of crew members. They're above the deck. They're looking out. It's very dark, and they see, I think, 3 glowing lights come out of the water, less than a mile from their location. So, I mean, pretty close, frankly. Definitely close enough to have a clear view of what that was. The 3 lights came up out of the water, hovered for a short while, maybe a minute or more, and then just moved off, like lifted up and left. That's his sighting. I think I recall reading a skeptic explanation would be some kind of phosphorescence, natural phosphorescence leaving the water, some form of oceanic ball lightning. I don't know. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I'm not saying it's impossible. It just seems very unlikely. If you are intent on explaining something away as natural phenomena, I'm sure you'll find a way to do it. But anyway, my point is, I think that's probably a legitimate USO sighting. But and there are a few of those types of things that go back even further into the past. So there are some, and we might be able to credit those. So we could hypothesize that there was has been a long-standing oceanic presence of other beings that have been here for a long time. And it's kind of interesting to think about that because we're talking centuries and more centuries. Like, what are they doing? What's their purpose? Do they just they've got a nice little, uh, like country club going on under the ocean floor where they can play ping pong and they can, read books or do whatever they're doing. And that's their place, like century after century after century. Is it, um, was it an automated kind of a observation where they've got essentially avatars and automated technology? I don't know. Every now and then there are sightings. You get people talking about running into other human-looking beings. It's almost always human-looking beings that seem out of place, that seem ultra advanced. What are those? Are those three-dimensional avatars that actually aren't real, but that are created? Like, we're just, coming up with ideas here because we don't really know. But I guess what I would just say is that there's enough evidence through the UFO stories going into the past to hypothesize that there's been a long-standing presence, including oceanic, sea-based presence. You definitely get a much greater number of ocean-based sightings from the 20th century onward. No question about that. And then that leaves open the issue. Is it because we're out in the oceans much more in the 20th century than we ever were before, which is definitely true. And we're more likely to notice such activity. I think, yeah, that's totally possible. And, I'm working on the assumption that they're here because of us, but I could be missing something as well. Maybe they're here just because of Earth, and there's things about Earth that are interesting to them. But if that's the case, they've definitely taken care not to overtly communicate with us. So, it's very interesting. Like, I really do wonder, how far back do they go in terms of an ocean-based presence? And I do think it's possible that they go back a number of centuries, but I don't know if they go back many, many, many centuries. It's hard to say. I definitely think that their presence has been at a much higher level, probably from the 19th century and then especially the 20th century onward. One thing that's obvious, and again, it's helpful to restate the obvious when we talk about this, is how they are not interested in openly cavorting and communicating with us. Not in a way that our society officially acknowledges them. And, when you really think about it, it makes perfect sense. In fact, it would make no sense, frankly, for them to do otherwise. Think about it. Let's say you're an alien. You have arrived here. You're observing, in part of your mission is to observe and monitor these humans. Now, it could be that your mission is to infiltrate and transform them, maybe, but it could also be that your mission is simply to observe. You do not want to openly announce yourself to the world of whether it's 1850 or 1900 or 1950, or there's really no period in the last couple of centuries in which it is beneficial for you to say, hey, look, Earthlings, here we are, take me to your leader. There is no situation in which that is beneficial. You ask yourself, what nation do you deal with? You've got all of these nations. They're all these scattered people. They're not really at a level yet to understand your science, your freaky science that probably involves manipulation of space and time in some way that they cannot understand. Anything prior to, say, the 1950s or 60s at the latest, or rather at the earliest, they might be able to understand. I mean, not a chance. Not a chance. I mean, it would probably be if nothing else, at the minimum, it would be a massive headache to deal with these human beings. And then, of course, they're going to want to shoot you. I read a case earlier a week ago. I'm going through, cases from 08 and 09, and I got this in my database now just for laughs. But this was in Minnesota. I think it was in early 09. A guy and his father are camping. They're not far from a military base up there. Can't remember which one it is. And there was an object overhead at night, and the younger guy literally took his rifle and shot at the UFO. Just shot at it. And he talked to his father the next day, and the father's like, "What is wrong with you? You're shooting at a UFO? How did that go work for you?" And there was no effect from it. But I mean, this is what people do. If we were ever to get to a situation where this is openly acknowledged, we all know there's a very strong likelihood that many people are going to want to go to war with these aliens. And there's many members of this side who'd be like, yes, we need to go to war with these aliens. They're here to take us over. But not everyone's going to agree with that, of course, and not all going to agree. But there certainly would be, from the point of view of the human elites. And now we're in 2022. So we're not in 1950 anymore. We've got satellites all over the place. At least some of our global leadership have access to all of that satellite information. And they clearly, at this point, must know that there is a powerful oceanic presence of highly intelligent, advanced beings that's on this planet. There is no way that this cannot be known at this point. In my view, I think it's a literal impossibility. Someone's got this information. They're tracking objects coming out of the water, going into the water, and there is just no way at all that they're ever going to admit to this. How could they possibly admit to this? This is the worst political nightmare. I mean, there's not a lot that's ever going to make me have sympathy for the political leadership of this world. I liken world geopolitics to the movie The Godfather and New York's Five Families. Like, people keep thinking today, oh yeah, there's like the good guys and the bad guys. There are no good guys. There are no good guys. Certainly not the United States. They're just one of the mafia families. If you watch The Godfather, you can root for the Corleones, but that doesn't mean that they're good. That doesn't mean that they're any better than the other families that they're competing with. That's our world. It's the five families. But there is one thing that makes me have a little bit of sympathy, just a little tiny bit of sympathy, is when I think of the situation that they must be in when they're dealing with this reality of these beings that are here. How do you tell the world that this is going on? Like, it's just not easy. I've asked myself this question countless times because I'm constantly been talking about the UFO cover-up, and I've often talked about disclosure. And I cannot tell you how many times people have asked me, well, if you were president, Richard, what would you do? And my answer is always the same, which is that I would disclose everything that I'm able to get my hands on and disclose. Like, I would do it. But that doesn't mean that it wouldn't scare the living hell out of me. Like, it's a nightmare to consider what UFO disclosure would be. And just one of those issues is you tell the world, yes, we're aware there's an oceanic base. They've got a base like somewhere in the Marianas Trench or some other place. I don't know where they've got it. Or they've got a base in Alaska. They've got a base in the Pyrenees. They've got a base. We think there's a base in the Himalayas. Like, I think there is a base in the Himalayas. In these various places, like, when you start identifying this, like, then your obligation is, once you acknowledge the problem, now, like, you're expected to do something about it. That's the biggest problem in politics. You acknowledge a problem. Now you can't just walk away. You got to do something. Well, what are you supposed to do? What if you can't do anything about these beings? Like, literally, you have no ability to deal with them. One of the it was funny in a way and arrogant in a way and sad in a way was when one of the Pentagon representatives at the UAP task force, Moultrie, is talking about, well, we are quite confident, he said, that we've got the ability, given, enough, we've got the technology, we've got the capability to identify all of these UAP, and he said mitigate them, if necessary, to mitigate them. And by that, clearly he meant deal with it, with weapons. Clearly is what he's talking about. And I listened to him say that, and I thought, no, you don't. Not at all. You do not have the ability to mitigate these UAP, not all of them. You've got people like Lou Elizondo talking about transmedium objects. I'm very glad he bothered to do that, because even now, like, we do not officially have the capability to have objects that are transmedium. That is, that can go from the ocean to the atmosphere to space all that easily. Yeah, we can go from the atmosphere to space, but ocean, no, that's a very, very difficult hurdle. And if we have the ability, it's completely within the black budget world with science that is revolutionary that we have not acknowledged. So, so the point is, like, this is a very, very difficult scenario for our global elites to talk about. And again, I'm the last person to defend these people. I think they're criminals engaged in creating a revolution in this world that I do not support, but they're doing it and it's happening, and there's not a thing I can do to stop it. So that's just that. But for them to acknowledge the reality of this phenomenon, that's difficult. And especially to what extent are they themselves beholden to these other beings? And let's just talk about this, because this isn't just some wackadoo conspiracy theorizing. This is actually, I think it's very logical. Think about this. You've got other beings that are here. They're clearly here. Some of them look human. I think that that's an open and shut case at this point. There's been too many accounts, but too many credible witnesses who have discussed this. And when Tracy is finally feeling well enough again, we're going to come back to some of the abduction accounts that we have been investigating and she has been investigating. And a lot of these deal with human-looking beings. They're here. If there is a human-looking contingent with very, very advanced technology and so forth, well then, have they had the ability to work their way into our society? Well, of course they would. Hell, I'm going through George Filer's files, and to my surprise, he's tossing this idea out back, 12, 13 years ago. He said, yeah, a lot of them are said to look human, and how difficult would it be for them to work their way into positions of influence in our society? They're highly intelligent. Of course they'd be able to do it. That's George Filer talking about this in 08, 09. And yes, I think it's quite logical. If that's the case, if it is at all possible, and it's absolutely possible, then you have to consider the possibility that they have got their hooks into the leadership of our global society. And I don't know that this is the case, but how can we say that there's no logic to it? How can we say that there's no possibility that this is the case? I think there is every possibility that this is the case. The big sticking point that I have is just, I don't know for an absolute fact that is the case. And because I can't say that I know for a fact, it just stops me from going to that final moment of certainty where I could just say, yes, I absolutely know this, but I can't go there. But as a hypothesis, it's an obvious one, and it makes perfect sense. And if nothing else, it has to be part of the conversation of the UFO community. Like, how could it not be? And yet, really, I don't hear anyone else outside of this website really talking about it all that much. But I do think it's, you've got, the David Jacobs and folks who follow his work who are like, yeah, there's an infiltration going on. But I think Jacob's scenario is actually only one part of a bigger picture that's going on here. It's important, but it's just one part. But I think what's happening now, I mean, I started this whole thing when talking about ocean-based UFO sightings and what I did over, looking at Adak Island and the Aleutians. And I just think we're dealing with a situation now where I think the main contingent started arriving probably less than 200 years ago. Few, then more, and we've got a kind of an active party going on here of non-human intelligences that are here, and there's just absolutely no way that they want to announce themselves publicly to humanity. There isn't an easy way for them to do it, and there is no easy way for our global elites to do it either, without compromising themselves and putting themselves in a very impossible position vis-a-vis the public, which is going to just demand a lot of answers that, to the extent that those answers can be provided, will very possibly not be positive and welcome answers. I think that's entirely possible. I do realize that there are folks who believe that the presence of these other beings is actually positive. And again, I read a whole disquisition of David Jacobs from 2008, 2009, in what was then called the Journal of Abduction Research. That was published by Elaine Douglas. Elaine's no longer with us. Jacobs wrote a very, very long piece for that in advance of his publication of Walking Among Us. And then I read a reply to it from someone who just thought that Jacobs was completely just off in his interpretation. And of course, there's always people who believe that. And this person said, look, these beings are from Zeta Reticuli. Jacobs believes that they are that they're basically evil, and they're here to kind of do planetary takeover. This person writing back said, no, I don't think that's the case at all. I think what we're dealing with is these beings, they screwed up their environment. I don't know how he gets this information. They screwed up their environment. They lost the ability to reproduce. They need our genetics. So we are trying to help. They are trying to get us to help them genetically, but they're also trying to help us. It works both ways. They don't want us to screw over our environment the way that they screwed their own environment. This is this other person's interpretation of the grays, essentially. How do I know that this is true? I have not the slightest clue. I have not the slightest way of knowing that that's true, but it is definitely an interpretation, and there could be truth to it. It could be true. I'm going to say this. It could be true. I just don't know that it's true. All I know is that these beings are operating by ultra stealth, and that there is a human, top of the level human elite. They know all about this, and they're not talking either. So we've got these large groups of other beings that are here. They're not announcing themselves, and our human superiors at the top of our ladder, they're not telling us either. And judging by what happened at the UAP hearings last week, there is no plan for them to tell us anything more than what they told us. I think there may be a contingent within Congress that actually is perhaps working with people like Chris Mellon and Lou Elizondo that does want more information out. That's the word. That's what Lou's been hinting. And that would be great if that's true. Maybe that is true. Whether they'll be able to do anything is a whole other question, and I'm doubtful that they're going to make a lot of headway, but I would love to be wrong there. So we're just, we're in a really screwed up situation here on this planet. I mean, it's just an incredible, everything that you read in your news is like literally inside out, upside down. Black is white, white is black. It's just wrong. It's just completely wrong. not just about the major geopolitics, which I almost can't even talk about half the time, because if I do that, I get people jumping all over me. I think you can kind of guess what I think when it comes to the Eastern European situation. I am the counter narrative on that. I'll just put it that way. And everything that you're hearing in the Western news is literally the opposite of what is true. Opposite of what is true. But anyway, it's not just that. It is the entire global vision of everything that's happening, like all of the important things that are going on in this world. The fact that there's a global revolution and is still happening, that is not being discussed. The fact that there is a massive presence of alien intelligence here, that is not being discussed. That is an enormous part of our world. And it's just none of it gets discussed. None of it is being talked about. We're living in a fairy tale land. That's what we live in. And you get spoon-fed. What did I say in my first book talking about Roswell? I said the army baked it, the press served it, and the public ate it. And that's our world to this day. You know, it's like little mama bird chewing up the food, feeding baby birds. Here's your little food, baby bird. That's our society. That's our media, which is, of course, completely in bed with the intelligence community, completely in bed with the financial community. Like everything that you're getting from major news is false. It's just totally false. And it exists for the purpose of manipulating you. That's it. So your answer, your proper response is you don't watch that stuff. You know, you've got to be independent. You've got to like find your own way. You've got to find your method of getting your information and using your critical thinking skills, because otherwise you don't have a chance. I was talking with a friend of mine, local friend, yesterday. I love this guy. He's a great guy. And he visits me because he has no other friend in his life that he can talk to about the world without them just hammering him, you know? So it's nice for him and it's nice for me. I enjoy his company. And I was just reflecting, you know, on my life. So I'm getting close to turning 60. I turned 60 in a month and a half from now. It's really an amazing thing to think about. I still feel good, all of that. But when I think of all the advantages that I have had in terms of understanding this world, and I think, so I know I've got a good intelligence. I'm not the smartest one, but there's a lot of you guys who's way smarter than me, but I'm not a dummy. And I always did very well in my academic program. I was always pretty much at the top or near the top of my class. So I had that whole thing going. And on top of that, I was a motivated student throughout all of my education. Like I was hyper aggressive, motivated student all through my grade school, my high school, my university, my graduate school. Like I just worked really hard and I was competitive. So, and on top of that, I studied a lot of all the good things to help understand the world today. So history, politics, philosophy, literature, like all of that helped me too. I ended up with a really fantastic, well-rounded, perfect liberal arts education. Back in the 1980s, when it was still possible to have a very, very excellent liberal arts education. I don't think it's possible in the university system any longer, but it was for me. And then after that, I left that world and continued on my own as an independent scholar, essentially is what I was. All through my 30s, all through my 40s, I became well-known around the time I turned 40. And then I was off to the races in UFOs. And like, I've never stopped. I've worked for myself all this time. I didn't have to punch the clock and do a 9 to 5. Like I have always been able to delve into the difficult mysteries of this world around us. I've never stopped. And I mean, I realized, look, so I had the gifts, some gifts. I had a great education, formal and informal. And I've always had this fanatical dedication, like really to the point of fanaticism, to try to understand the true structure of power of this world. that I have been doing since I was 15 years old, 45 years. And you know what? Here's what I was telling my friend yesterday. It took me into my 50s before I really, in my opinion, looking back, started genuinely putting like big pieces together and starting to understand this world. I mean, it took me that long. And I had every advantage that I can think of. Independence, I had the ability, I had great education, and a fantastic memory. Like, I remember things. I can synthesize things. Like, and it's been that difficult for me. And I think, holy shit. If it's that difficult for me, what is the chance that any of my neighbors or any of your neighbors, like that they're just going to have the ability to figure any of this stuff out? And the answer is there's no chance. They're not going to figure this out. They've got jobs, they got families, they got responsibilities, and most of them don't have the inclination. They don't have the background. They don't have the education. Like, they just don't have those things. So my friend was listening to this, and he's like, well, look, you're getting a little worked up here. First of all, he says, when I go to the dentist, I haven't studied orthodontics the way my dentist does. I rely on his knowledge to work on my teeth. I'm not going to do that myself. It's the same with you, he said. Like, you have spent the time, you've done this, and the rest of we're relying on you, he said to me, to know this stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, sure, I understand that. But I said, guess what? I'm not perfect. Like, I have made my share of mistakes. That's what scares me to death. Like, this is difficult. And it still doesn't change my conclusion. It's like, okay, I'm not like a dentist. Like, I'm just someone who has an intense curiosity about this world, about this phenomenon that we share, this UFO phenomenon. That's really the only thing that separates me. Like, I just have an intense curiosity, and I threw myself into it. So that's good. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but man, like, getting to the bottom of this, like, it's a very damn difficult thing to do. And for most people to understand this. And so when you have a political elite that's like, they consider themselves, they're the masters of the universe, at least as far as they're concerned. Do we honestly think they're going to come down to our level and tell us the things that they know about UFOs and aliens and the presence of these other beings here? I'm like, there's no way. They're not going to do it. It's not going to happen. It's never going to happen voluntarily. Never will never happen voluntarily. That's why I don't think they're not going to do a disclosure. It's too much of a headache, too much of a hassle, too much explosive, revolutionary stuff that will be discussed. And in the midst of this global clampdown, this revolution that is absolutely happening, no, they're not going to do it. So we're on our own. We are on our own. Good news with me is, look, it took me all these years. I'm about to turn 60. And the good news is, I'm going to tell you, I feel, I could be wrong here, but I don't think I'm wrong. I feel like I see things with a razor sharpness that I didn't even have 10 years ago. This is how I feel. I hope that this is not just arrogant presumption on my part, but I think that I'm seeing things very, very clearly these days. So that's good. So what that means is I'm not out of the game here as we're lurching forward into this whacked out dystopia that we're moving into. I'm still here. I'm hoping to have at least a good 20 years more where I can keep working. And so I'm not done. So you stick here with me and Tracy, especially when she gets better. And we're going to stay with us. And we're going to do our best to understand just what the hell is going on with the UFO phenomenon, the alien phenomenon, and the geopolitical nuttiness and lies and all of that, because what else is there for us to do? I mean, we can waltz through life with that little blue pill and, pretend live in fairy tale land, or we can, if we've got the moxie to do it, we take that red pill and we go down the rabbit hole of truth. That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. And I have good weeks, I have less good weeks, but I'm always here and I'm always doing this. And I hope you stay with me in this journey, because look, I got to have someone to talk to about this. There's Tracy, and she, I talk to her, but I got to talk to you too. That's what we're doing. Okay. Hope that was interesting, entertaining. Basically, this is just, I had a couple of notes in front of me, a couple of bullet points, and basically I just kind of went off here. So I hope you found that interesting. I enjoyed talking to you about this. This is about a lot more than just ocean-based UFOs, wasn't it? We kind of got into the whole thing. I'm going to wrap this up and make some dinner. I hope everyone is doing well. I hope you're feeling good. I hope you're staying sane amidst the madness. Let's keep it together. Catch you all again real soon. Bye for now.